For having come here. Thank you for your presentation.
We share additional information in the coming weeks and months. Thank you very much. Merci.
Introduce myself. I am Claude Aubin, a Métis from the Lower St. Lawrence. I am Rock Matt. I'm a Malécite Métis from the Lower St. Lawrence. I am Andy Frost. I'm a Métis from Forclonge. I'm Elisabeth de Madeleine, Métis from the Couillon. I am Cécile Jean Legros, Métis from Sainte Veronica. I'm Sylvie Plouffe, Métis from Mont-Laurier. I'm Régent Pilote, Métis from the Lac Saint-Jean area.
Marie-Joseph Riel.
Marie-Joseph Riel.
De famille Riel.
I'm a representative of the Riel from Lavaltrie. Martine Brisebois, Métis from Mont-Laurier. Bruno Meyer, Île du Grand Calumet. I'm a Métis.
Bonjour, Monsieur le Commissaire.
Bonjour et bienvenue.
Good afternoon. Welcome. Before we begin, we would like to tell you about something that was hidden or which has been kept secret for a great number of years, and it is a first. We brought it to the Commission. You have before you right now what we call the royal scepter of the native people. The royal scepter is also called the king's stick or the crown stick, which helps to instaure justice and balance. Without going into detail, I cannot forget to remind you that we have also brought you a box which is very special. This box represents, by its inscription, or rather is part of an immense treaty held here in Montreal of 1701 of peace and friendship between all native people. This box contains wampum belts that through the years we will try to recover. Later, we will explain what the role of the Métis were in this treaty. One day, this stick was close to Mr. Justice Lemaire. I had the opportunity to bring him to Whitehorse. He did not know what it was about, and piqued by his curiosity, he said, "Claude, what is that you keep beside you? And you will allow no one to touch it." I said, "Mr. Lemaire, this is the equivalent of you yourself, and maybe one day I will have the opportunity of bringing it to you and explain it to you. I do not have the time to do the whole reading, but I hope that the Commission, by its curiosity, will be piqued and will ask us to have it in private with the commissioners."
Bonjour, mesdames, messieurs, et membres de la Commission
Good day,
royale.
ladies and gentlemen, and members of the Royal Commission.
Merci pour bien avoir
And
voulu
thank you
nous accueillir.
for having welcomed us today.
Je voudrais dire aussi que
I would
nous
like
ne
to say
représentons aucune
that
association.
we do not represent any
Notre
association per
intervention
se.
est strictement
Our
sur une base personnelle.
intervention is strictly personal.
Nous vous présentons le présent mémoire
We are
au nom
presenting
des Métis
this brief in the name of the Métis, who are identified as a distinct native nation
une nation qui
in
n'a
the
plus
province, a
envie
nation
mais qui a la volonté de vivre d'égal à égal
who
avec toutes les autres nations
does not
autochtones
wish to survive
qui existent
as
et qui
such,
résident sur
but
le
who has the
territoire de la
wish to
province de
live
Québec.
on an equal basis with all other Native associations on the territory of Quebec.
Nous, les Métis, dans la province de Québec,
We, the Métis of the
avons
province
été
of Quebec,
façonnés par la dure réalité des confrontations militaires
came about
suite à la
because of the
rencontre
harsh
des
reality
deux
of military confrontations following the
où des
meeting
prises de pouvoir
of
du
two
passé
worlds,
et
or
du
where
présent
the powerful
entre les
stakes of the
nations
past
autochtones,
and the present between
la France
Native
et
nations,
l'Angleterre.
France and England took place.
Notre nation métisse
Our
est
Métis
issue
nation has come
de la,
from this
de la
reality,
réalité de la rencontre
or
de ces
the
deux
congruence
nations
of two nations
avec les nations autochtones.
with
Il y a de ça
Native
belle lurette.
nations, and this occurred a long time ago.
Nous sommes aussi le produit
We're also the
de lois
product of laws
assimilatrices
aimed
de
at
jeux politiques
assimilation,
qui ont façonné
games
la façon de penser et
which
d'agir
have
et
affected
surtout
our
la façon
thinking
que les autres
and acting,
nations
and
sont
especially
aussi
have had an
nos
effect on the
nations
way in which
d'origine,
the other
habitants du
nations
territoire
who
du
are
Québec se perçoivent et nous
original
perçoivent aujourd'hui
inhabitants of the territory
en tant
of
qu'autochtones.
Quebec perceive us as being native.
Nous étions, il y a déjà de ça des centaines d'années,
Hundreds of years ago,
reniés par nos
we were
nations
denied
d'origine, de nos pères
by
ou de nos mères.
our original nations, be they our
Nous
mothers
sommes le
or
produit
fathers.
matériel
We
et
are the material and spiritual
de la
product
rencontre de deux
of the
mondes,
meeting of two worlds,
de deux individus
of two
qui s'étaient
individuals
unis par amour.
who came together out of love.
Les ceintures de wampum
The
et les
wampum
prophéties
belts and the
autochtones
native
en parlent
prophecies
constamment
talk about this constantly.
et parlent aussi
They
qu'un
talk
jour,
also
de nouveaux autochtones
about a day
émergeront pour
when new
participer
natives will emerge
au
and
développement
help participate in the development and the establishment of a new native, and that the work will not be easy.
Pour tous les autochtones,
For all native people,
la force de vie,
the strength
le
of
grand
life,
esprit,
the
a
Great
offert
Spirit,
qu'une seule forme de
offered
gouvernement
one only
pour avoir
form of
juridiction
government
sur l'île de la Tortue,
for jurisdiction
confédérations.
over Turtle Island, the confederations.
Seul le respect de l'esprit et de la
Only
spiritualité
through respect
qui
of the
anime une
spirit and
confédération
spirituality which animates
protégera la
our
nation
confederation
métisse.
can we protect the Métis Nation.
La confédération
Confederation
est
is a
un
native
autochtone
concept
qui fut offert aux
which
nations
was
autochtones
offered
par le
to
Créateur
our native nations
La
by the
force de
Creator, the strength of life,
en tant qu'outil
as a
politique
political tool
pour maintenir
to
la
maintain
paix
peace
et l'unité parmi
and
les
unity
nations
among nations,
et pour donner une voix
and to
égale
give equal
à
voice
toute la population
to all the
et à toutes les
population
nations
and to all
afin d'éviter les
nations
conflits.
in order to avoid conflicts.
Notre retour
Our return to a political
d'une
structure
confédération de gens
made
et
up
de
of a
communautés
confederation of people and communities
nous offre et
offers
restaure
us and
cet
restores this
symétrique qu'utilisaient les
symmetric
nations
tool
autochtones
used by
pour
native
maintenir
nations to
la
maintain
paix,
peace, justice,
la justice et
and
l'harmonie.
harmony.
C'est pourquoi nous nous sommes
This is
regroupés
why
tout dernièrement
we met
sous une
a short while
confédération de
ago
métis
as a confederation
pour
of
contrer
Métis
l'esprit de la division de la population
to
métisse
combat
créée
the spirit
par les
of
récentes
division
négociations
in the Métis
constitutionnelles.
population created by the recent constitutional negotiations.
La population de la nation métisse au Québec
The Métis Nation's population in Quebec is made up of all those who can identify themselves as being Métis according to the community belonging code ruling the Métis Nation in Quebec. We probably became, through centuries, the native nations which comprises the greatest number of citizens. Culturally and traditionally, we are at the center of the medicine wheel, according to the philosophy which is taught to us by our elders. We recognize that the laws of the Creator are the supreme laws of the Métis, through which the Creator gave us our spiritual knowledge, our languages, our culture, and our place on Mother Earth. The Creator also gave us intelligence to govern and establish relations in harmony with Earth, nature, and humanity. The laws of the Creator also define our original jurisdiction, our inherent rights, our responsibilities, our obligations, and we recognize that these laws cannot be changed or withdrawn by any other nation on earth. Politically speaking, the Métis are recognized by the Canadian Constitution, and we now are part of the great fraternity of Native people, as the Québécois and the Acadians are part of the great fraternity of Francophone people. As a distinct nation, we, the Métis, also are part of the Great Confederation of Native Nations in North America. And as Métis, we are also rights which flow from most of the treaties which were negotiated in North America between Native nations, France, England, or Canada. We also have the right to treaties and agreements which were held before the Canadian Confederation and before the capitulation of the home of origin of some of you, France. The Québécois, more than any other nation living in Canada, country located on Turtle Island, must certainly understand better than we can explain. Also, we want to notify you that a very small number of our population are status Indians, and we hope for better treatment following the changes brought to the Indian Act and the Bill C-30 without having to relinquish our identity as Métis. Some say that only through a recognition of our status as natives can we be recognized under the Indian Act. It seems that all of these have to belong to Indian bands of First Nations. There are those who are uncomfortable to identify with the Métis, unfortunately, claim to belong to a certain Indian band, were not accepted publicly. It is said that the Métis population is not representative because it is not managed according to the criteria in the Indian Act, or they do not have a strict code of belonging. Other Métis know and understand that even if they became Indians, thanks to amendments to the Indian Act, they could never be real members of an Indian band or members of their original native nation. So even if they are, administratively speaking, recognized as Indians, still wishing to be part of the great fraternity of Métis, what they are truly, they cannot be. Other Métis are fed up because constantly humiliated, because they demonstrate different physical, cultural, and spiritual characteristics. Other Métis prefer a total political dissociation with status Indians living off reserve, because they want to decide once and for all what their future will be, and they identify as a Métis. The Métis have a history and culture which is different and warrants being respected, written and preserved. Bill C-31 had a major impact on the majority of Métis who are convinced of their cultural, social, political identity because they belong to the Métis Nation. Native people, we are a distinct nation, and as long as Native nations will not consider us belonging to them, then our people will continue to exist and grow as a separate entity. We are part of a distinct nation with distinct aspirations, and we want to establish our own national government.
Nous sommes en mesure de nous représenter nous-mêmes devant cette
We
commission
can represent ourselves before the Commission because we are what we are, and there is no law or any other nation who can define what we are, especially not a membership of corporate associations. We identify our people in Quebec as a 12th distinct Native nation in the province of Quebec, and the Métis Nation as the 55th Native nation in Canada.
Nous sommes une nation et nous voulons être respectés par ce choix. Tout comme ceux qui ont choisi d'appartenir à une nation distincte pour le peuple québécois. Les Métis vivent parallèlement à la même expérience que la nation québécoise.
De toute la juridiction
It is
originaire
obvious that
procure
the
certains
original
droits pour tous les
jurisdiction
autochtones et leurs nations,
bears rights for all
qui
natives and
découlent
nations,
ni de
and they
l'appartenance
flow
géographique,
neither
ni de
out
certaines
of geographic belonging or certain specificities such as self-determination,
ni d'aucune autre
no, they
forme de
flow out of a
juridiction
different
dont
form of
dérivent
jurisdiction.
parfois certains droits. Un droit,
A right,
selon une interprétation
according to
juridique
a strict
stricte,
legal
signifie
interpretation,
qu'une obligation a été créée quelque part,
means that an obligation was
ainsi que le
created
droit à la vie
somewhere.
signifie conséquemment qu'une personne a
Similarly, the right to
l'obligation
life
de ne
means
pas
that
enlever
a
la
person
vie à
has
une
the
autre
obligation
personne.
not to remove life to someone
La
else.
loi, à cet égard, ne vient que
So
renforcer
such a law
l'obligation.
just reinforces one's obligation.
La juridiction
The
originaire,
original
comme nous l'avons dit
jurisdiction, as we
précédemment,
said before,
réfère au droit.
is based in law.
Ce droit en soi
A right
sous-entend une obligation qui
entails an obligation
est contenue dans la loi.
which is contained in a law.
À notre avis,
In our minds,
tous
all
du
of
Canada
the
détiennent
Métis
certains
in
droits
Canada have certain rights,
et le peuple canadien et les
and
autres
the
nations
Canadian people
autochtones
and other
doivent
native
respecter les
nations must
obligations
respect the
qu'ils ont envers les
obligations they
citoyens de la
have
nation métisse.
towards the citizens of
Tout.
the Métis Nation.
Comme tout dans leur province
As
de Québec ou ailleurs au Canada.
elsewhere in Quebec or Canada.
Ces obligations
These
n'ont rien à
obligations
voir
have
avec le
nothing to
principe
do
de base
with
territoriale ou avec le
the
pouvoir de passer des
basic
lois.
territorial principle or with the power to enact laws.
Le simple fait d'être
The
métis
simple
donne des
fact
droits
that
aux
one
gens
is
qui
a
détiennent
Métis
ce statut
gives a
et
right to
le peuple
people
canadien,
who are of that status,
Québécois et
and
les autres nations
the
autochtones
Quebec, Canadian
n'ont de choix que dans le
people
respect de
and
ces
other
obligations envers toutes les
native
nations
nations
autochtones,
don't have a
qu'ils soient
choice
régis
but
par la
to
loi
respect these
sur
obligations
les Indiens ou
because
pas.
they come under the law, be they
La loi
Indians or not.
Et,
The law,
en ce
and in
cas-ci,
this
la
case, we
Constitution
refer to the Canadian
canadienne vient d'ailleurs
Constitution
renforcer cet
has just
état de fait
reinforced
de façon à
this
garder intacte l'image d'un
fact
Canada légal et
to
libre.
keep Canada's image intact
Ainsi,
as being both legal
La juridiction
and
originaire se clarifie.
trustworthy. So the original
Elle suggère
jurisdiction
que
is
lorsqu'une
clarified. It
personne
suggests that
traite
when a
avec un
person deals
autochtone
with a
ou un
native
représentant
or a
d'une autre
representative
nation,
of a native nation,
cette personne
this
a
person has
alors
the
l'obligation
obligation
de
to take
prendre en
into consideration
considération
the
l'auto-ethnicité et
auto-ethnicity
la loi propre à
and
sa nation autochtone.
the
Peu
laws
importe
that
si cela
pertain
affecte son propre
to
droit.
its own native
La
nation.
section 35 de la Constitution vient, à notre avis, renforcer cette obligation
Article
légale
35 of the
à l'égard des
Constitution
Métis.
reinforces this legal obligation towards the Métis.
Pour que la nation métisse au Québec
For the Métis
puisse
Nation
négocier
in
d'égal
Quebec
à
to
égal,
negotiate on an
elle a
equal
besoin d'outils de
basis,
travail.
it must be given
La
tools.
nation métisse
The
veut
Métis
négocier
Nation
de
wants to
nation en nation,
negotiate
de
on a
gouvernement à
nation-to-nation
gouvernement.
level,
Nous
government-to-government
croyons que nous ne
level.
pouvons pas
We
vous
believe that we
adresser la
cannot
parole sous le concept d'une
speak to you
association et nous ne voulons
as
pas
an
vous
association.
devant
Neither do
comme
we
vivant
want to
hors
be
réserve.
identified before
car
you
nous sommes
as
une
being
nation.
off reserve. We are a nation.
Nous ne vivons pas hors
We
réserve
do not live
comparativement aux
off reserve
francophones vivant hors Québec.
comparatively to francophones living off
Est-ce que les
Quebec.
Acadiens vivent
Do
hors Québec?
Acadians live out of
Est-ce que les
Quebec?
Québécois vivent
Do
hors de la France?
Quebecers live out of France?
Naturellement que non, car ce serait
Naturally,
renier
the
leur
answer
propre
is no,
identité
because it
comme
would be a
nation.
denial of their own identity as a nation.
Tout comme les Québécois et les Acadiens,
In
nous
the same
sommes ce que
way
nous
as
sommes, façonnés
Québécois
par
and
l'histoire et le temps.
Acadians,
Nous
we
vivons
are
partout
what
sur
we
des
are.
terres réclamées
We
par
have
les
been
autres
shaped
11
through
nations
time and
autochtones
history.
et la population
We
canadienne
live
vivant dans la province de
everywhere
Québec.
over land
Les
claimed
seules
by
terres que nous
other,
avons acquises ont
the
été
other
acquises
11
individuellement
native
par des remises
nations
de
and the Canadian
concessions
population living in the
ou que
province
nous
of
avons
Quebec.
payées de notre propre
The
poche.
only land we have are those that which were
L'histoire est
acquired
l'histoire et
individually.
nous avons été façonnés
History is
par cette
history,
histoire.
and we were
Tout
shaped
comme le
by
peuple
it.
québécois qui
Just
n'appartient plus à
as
la
the
France,
Quebec
nous
people
les
doesn't
Métis
no longer
n'appartenons
belong to
plus à nos
France,
nations autochtones
we the
d'origine
Métis
d'antan.
no longer belong to our
On peut
original
concéder que
native
plusieurs d'entre
nation.
nous à
One
bout
could
de souffle
concede
et se sont
that a
joints à
lot
la
of
population
us are out
canadienne
of breath
ou québécoise,
and have joined
tout
the
comme d'autres
Canadian
ont
or
pu se
Quebec
joindre au rang
population,
d'une bande
as any
indienne,
others
suite
could
aux amendements mineurs apportés
join
à la loi sur les
the ranks
Indiens
of an
en
Indian band
1985.
following the amendments brought to
D'autres sont
the
devenus
Indian
des
Act in
Indiens en
85.
réserve,
Others
sans
have
nation
become
d'origine pour les
Indians
recevoir.
off reserve without an original nation.
Cette critique
There's a
constante,
constant criticism.
cette critique constante de ce que nous sommes doit être arrêtée. Cette
Of what we are, and it must
responsabilité
come
de
to
nous
an end.
permettre de vivre librement
We
incombe
must be
non
given
seulement au gouvernement
the
fédéral et
responsibility to
provincial,
live
mais
freely
aussi aux
on the
autres
part not
nations
only of
autochtones
the
sur
federal
le
and provincial
territoire du
government,
Québec.
but also on the part of other
Nous
native
savons
nations on the
que
territory
tous
of
ces
Quebec.
gouvernements
We
ne
know
pourront, malgré
that
toutes les bonnes volontés rectifier du jour au lendemain
these governments will not be able to, despite all goodwill, rectify things from one day to the next. And I refer to the seriousness perpetrated against our population since the day the two worlds met. And this goes back 5 centuries. We also know that all of the governments concerned can take steps and take decisions which are likely to accept us, thereby allowing for a progressive improvement of our individual and collective lifestyle. These governments will have to let go of their numerous prejudices against us and dare set aside the ignorance which create obstacles to us in order to recognize the more objective and fair history of our population, Métis Nation in Quebec or elsewhere. All of these governments will have to recognize the true nature of relationships which existed between the citizens of the native nations and the colonials. And the role of the Métis played throughout the history as a mediator between these two groups. It is important to clarify today why most of the Métis living in Quebec or elsewhere came to the decision that they wanted to be identified as a distinct native nation, different from other native nations. From the very beginning of the meeting of these two worlds, our ancestors who came together out of love were not accepted either by one or the other of the nations of our ancestors, and consequently we had to become a nomadic people of no man's land, escaping the abuse of political associations of either one or the other of our parents' nations.
We formed little by little our own communities in respect of our own reality. We were denied access to the community constituted by European settlers and those of the native nations. Later, around 1791, with the establishment of colonial governments, legislations were passed concerning the savages and their land. These legislations, whose sole purpose was the elimination of the native nations and their assimilation in the Canadian society, have greatly contributed to the growth of our new nation. Ever since the 1850s, legislations, the federal government and its agents have proceeded in this for a period of 200 years to a categorization and an attempt to systematically elimination of the native nations. The native prophecies spoke and are still speaking about it. First, there was the creation of reservations and their developable living conditions. Then the famous native registry and established by the federal agents. Others previously registered but absent during the revision were excluded from the register. Consequently, they were denied access reservation. Many of these came to our communities and married within the Métis population. Some succeeded in receiving scrips of land compensation. We are still here at the mercy of our federal and provincial government, critics, and those of our original native nations.
There was
also Article 12.1b of the Indian Act and the federal government policy of franchising. All of these political actions that were not successful in totally assimilating us to Quebecers, whatever the federal, provincial government have to say, or those of the Indian bands of our original nations, we, the Métis in the province of Quebec, are not part, neither by circumstance or because we were deprived of belonging, neither to one or the other of our original nations. We belong to the Métis Nation, the nation that has been ours forever. Following the recent constitutional agreements and the Métis Accord in the western area of Canada, we almost lost everything. And today, more than ever, we must demonstrate the need to develop ourselves as a distinct nation, and we reassess our Aboriginal rights as Métis, being part of the Métis Nation of Canada. We have all gone beyond the step where we are told by provincial and federal civil servants that we belong to 11 other nations over the territory of Quebec. Governments of one or the other of our original nations have no desire to reintegrate us within their nation and to respect our identity, even if, in many cases, we are a mirror to their own history. We do not belong to the other 11 nations on the territory of Quebec or of Quebecers. We have chosen a specific collective identity which is linked to our social, cultural, political identity. We are the 12th Native nation on the territory of Quebec. We are Métis.
Nous allons prendre maintenant le deuxième
Now we will
document,
start the second document
sur l'entente de principe.
on an agreement in principle.
Sous la juridiction originaire des peuples autochtones, les
Under
Métis
the
résidant
original
dans ce qui est
jurisdiction
maintenant
of
appelé
the
la
native
province de
people, the
Québec,
Métis residing in
sont
what is now
présentement
called the
prêts à
province of
négocier
Quebec
une
are
entente
now
avec
ready
le
to
Canada
negotiate
et
an
le
agreement
Québec.
with Canada and Quebec.
Maintenant que la Constitution
Now
du
that the
Canada
Canadian
reconnaît
Constitution
et confirme
recognizes and
les droits
confirms our
et traités des peuples autochtones,
our
incluant
treaties
ceux des
and our
Métis,
rights,
il est juste et désirable que le Canada, le Québec et les
Métis
Premières
and the
Nations
Native people, it is
consentent
both
à
fair
reconnaître la contribution
and
faite
desirable
par
that
les
Canada,
Métis au
Quebec, and
Québec
the
comme
First
peuple
Nation
distinct
recognize
et
the
du rôle qu'ils ont
contribution made
joué
by
dans
the
le
Métis in
développement de la
Quebec as a
Confédération
distinct people
canadienne
and the role they
ainsi que
played in the
celui de la
development of the
province de
Canadian
Québec.
and the Quebec
Par conséquent, les
Confederation.
Métis au Québec désirent
Consequently,
entreprendre des
Métis of Quebec
négociations
want
avec le
to
gouvernement fédéral
enter
et
into
celui du Québec
negotiations with the
pour
federal
l'obtention
and
d'une
Quebec
entente
government
acceptable pour établir leur propre
with an aim
rôle
to
et obligations envers tous et chacun.
reach an
La
acceptable
nation métisse
agreement
du Québec, du Canada
to
et les
establish their
Premières
own roles and
Nations, les
obligations,
Inuits,
both
les Canadiens et les
Métis
Québécois.
Nation, Canada, the First Nations,
La
Inuits,
nation
Canadians, and
métisse au
Quebecers.
Québec
The Métis
est
Nation in
prête à
Quebec is
négocier de
ready
bonne
to
foi la
negotiate
mise en
good
œuvre de ses
the
droits à
implementation
l'autonomie
of
gouvernementale,
our rights
incluant
to
les questions de sa juridiction
self-government,
sur son
including
développement
questions
économique,
over
social,
jurisdiction,
politique et culturel, de
economic,
ses
social,
arrangements
political, cultural
fiscaux,
development,
la
fiscal
gestion des
arrangements,
terres et
management
ressources,
of lands and
les ressources
resources,
financières
financial
nécessaires à la
resources necessary to
négociation, la
negotiation,
délégation des coûts
delegation
d'institutions
of costs
gouvernementales,
for governmental
programmes et
institutions,
services,
programs and services,
transfert de paiement,
payment
la
transfers,
protection de tous les
protection
engagements
of all
existants,
existing
incluant l'amendement à la section
commitments,
91-24 de
including the
l'Acte de la
amendment
Constitution
of Article 9124 of the Constitutional Act of 1867
et les certitudes
and
légales
the
entre la
legal
nation
certainties
métisse au Québec, le
between
Canada
the
et la
Métis
province
Nation
de
in
Québec.
Quebec, Canada, and Province of Quebec.
Ce gouvernement métis,
This Métis
mandaté
government,
par la population
mandated
de
by
la
the
nation
population
métisse
of the
au
Métis
Québec,
Nation in Quebec,
devra et
will
continuera
and
à promouvoir
should
et
and will
protéger
continue
le
to
principe
promote and protect the
d'égalité
principle
et
of
d'équité
equality
à
and
travers des
fairness
principes
through
sociopolitiques et
socio-political
culturels
and
parmi nos
cultural
communautés,
principles in
notre
our
nation
communities,
et
our
notre
nation, and our
confédération.
confederation,
Non seulement
not
avec
our
les
Canadian
Canadiens,
government,
mais aussi
but
avec tous
also
les
with all
autres
of the
gouvernements nationaux,
national
tous
governments,
résidant
all
sur l'île de la Tortue.
residing on Turtle Island.
Aujourd'hui, la plupart des
Today,
Métis
most
résidant
of
dans
the
la
Métis
province de
residing in the
Québec
province
s'identifient
of
à un
Quebec
peuple autochtone
identify
distinct,
with a distinct
connu
native people
sous le nom de la Nation
known
métisse au
as
Québec.
the Métis Nation in Quebec.
Aujourd'hui, l'ordre du jour politique du Conseil national des Métis du Canada est
Today,
présentement établi et contrôlé par quelques-uns de
Our
nos frères
political
et sœurs
agenda
qui ont un plus
has
grand
been
intérêt dans la
established and controlled by
reconnaissance
some of
des
our
Métis
brothers and
reliés qu'aux
sisters who have great
établissements de la
interest in the
Rivière-Rouge.
recognition of the Métis
De plus, le Conseil national des Autochtones n'est
in
préoccupé que
the
par
Red
la
River
diffusion de
area.
services et programmes
Also,
pour les
the
Indiens
National
vivant hors
Council of
réserve
Natives is
plutôt que de
concerned by the
l'unification des
dissemination
Métis
of programs and
basée sur une
services for
reconnaissance
Indians living off
protégée par la
reserve,
création
rather
d'un
than
gouvernement
the
métis
unification
distinct
of Métis
pour une
based on
population
a
métisse
recognition
distincte
protected by the
appartenant
creation
à
of
des
a
communautés
distinct
métisses
Métis
distinctes
government
partout
for
au Canada.
distinct Métis population belonging to distinct Métis communities
D'ailleurs,
across
c'est la
Canada.
raison qui pousse les Métis du Canada pour s'affilier au Conseil national des Autochtones du Canada, d'établir la
This is the
Confédération
reason why
des Métis.
the Métis of
Les
Canada have
présents amendements
affiliated to the
constitutionnels
National
proposés
Council
par
of
le
Native People
Conseil
in
national
Canada
des Métis et le Conseil national des Autochtones
and
du
the
Canada
National Council
ne
of
respectent pas
Native
pleinement
People
les
in Canada do
aspirations
not
politiques,
respect the
sociales
political
et culturelles
aspirations,
de la
the social
population
ones
de la nation
of
métisse à
the
l'extérieur de l'établissement de la Rivière-Rouge.
Métis people
Nous, les
of
Métis
the
dans
Red
la
River.
province du Québec,
We, the Métis
refusons
of the
d'accepter
Quebec
que
province,
l'autonomie
refuse to accept that the
gouvernementale
self-government
signifie l'établissement
means the
d'institutions
establishment
coopératives
of corporate
pour pouvoir
institutions in order
notre
to
développement économique, nos
serve
programmes
our
d'éducation
development,
et habitation,
economic development,
sous le concept des
our
autochtones
lodging,
vivant
and
en réserve.
etc.
À travers l'histoire
Through
des
time,
négociations,
through negotiations,
nous savons très bien
we
ceci.
know full well
Qu'est-ce que ceci signifie?
What this all
Cela
means.
signifie simplement
This
le contrôle de
is
la
the
nation
control of
par
our
les Indiens
population
statués vivant en réserve.
for
Nous ne sommes
Indians
pas un peuple vivant en
that
réserve,
have status and
car
living
nous
on
avons nos
reserves.
propres communautés
We
distinctes.
have our own
Nous,
distinct
les Métis, dans la province
communities.
du
We, the
Québec,
Métis,
faisons
in the
partie
province
d'une
of
nation
Quebec, are
distincte
part
à
of a
travers du
distinct
Canada
nation
et même
everywhere
les
in Canada
États-Unis.
and even in the United
Nous
States.
faisons partie d'une nation distincte
We're
dans la
part of a
province du
distinct
Québec.
nation in the province of Quebec.
We can no longer take a backseat to the First Nation and off-reserve Indians, dream of self-government hopefully awaiting their goodwill. We, the Métis Nation of Quebec, have the right to a front row seat, and we are taking it accordance to our nation Métis definition. We, the Métis of the province of Quebec, view our position in respect as to who we are and to what we can accomplish, to take care of and manage our own business in the equality with the other native nations, each different from one another. We, the Métis of the province of Quebec, want to participate actively to the developing process which will help us achieve equality and equity for our people and for our Métis Nation. Distinct from other native nations, we are the 12th nation in the province of Quebec, and we will never settle for less than everything which is available for each of us in the present Constitution agreement, even if this implies more work and negotiations to attain our rank of a distinct nation. We, the Métis of the province of Quebec, can, as any other nation, negotiate our own government legislations, our own contemporary treaty. No one has the right to deny us recognition as belonging to the Métis Nation of Canada, not even the National Métis Council.
Nous, les Métis dans la province de Québec,
We,
faisons
the
partie d'une
Métis in the
nation
province
en
of Quebec,
évolution,
are part of a nation
avec
in
aucune
evolution,
intention ou prétention de
with
devenir
no
nous
intention
sommes
or
pas.
pretension of becoming what we are
Membres d'une
not.
autre Première Nation,
Members of
nous voulons
other First
contrôler notre
Nations,
destinée
of
politique,
another other
culturelle,
nation. We want to control our own
sociale
political
et
destiny, our
économique
cultural
avec
destiny, our
notre
social and
propre
economic
gouvernement,
destiny with our
comme
own
toute autre nation
government,
distincte.
just like any other
Nous, les
distinct
Métis dans la
nation.
province de
We,
Québec,
the Métis
nous
in
nous
the
sommes
province of
laissés
Quebec,
duper trop longtemps.
have been
Nous,
ignored
les
and
Métis de la
betrayed too
province de
often.
Québec,
We,
ne
in the
sommes pas
province of
seulement
Quebec, are
concernés par
not
les
only
services,
concerned with
nous sommes
services,
plutôt
but we're
concernés par
rather
la
concerned
création
with the creation
de notre propre
of our
gouvernement,
own government,
sous notre propre autonomie
with our own
gouvernementale,
self-determination,
sous la juridiction de notre
under
population,
the jurisdiction
comme
of our
peuple
own
distinct dans la
population, as a
province de
distinct
Québec,
population in the province
chose
of
que les
Quebec,
Premières Nations prennent déjà pour acquis.
an element that is often taken for
Nous,
granted
les
by other
Métis dans la
First
province de
Nations.
Québec, comme
We,
nation
the Métis in
distincte,
the province of Quebec, as a
pourrions
distinct
joindre
nation,
la Grande
could
Confédération des
join
Nations autochtones
the Confederation
lorsque
of
les
Native
Premières Nations
Nations
auront compris
when the First Nations
le
will have
concept
the
spirituel
concept
et
of spiritual
politique
unity and
de la
political unity of the
Confédération
Confederation
pour unir
in order to
tous les
unite
Autochtones.
all Native people.
Nous, les Métis
We,
dans la
the
province de
Métis
Québec,
in
ne
the province
vivrons
of
jamais
Quebec,
sur
will
une
never
réserve
live on
parce
reserves
que cette définition
because that
de territoire
definition of
ne se
territory
rattache pas à notre histoire,
does not link
à
itself
notre
to our
culture
history, to
et à
our
nos
culture, and to
aspirations
our
de juridiction
aspirations in
territoriale.
terms of territorial
Nous, les
jurisdiction.
Métis dans la
We,
province de
the
Québec,
Métis in
n'avons
the
jamais
province of
été
Quebec,
reconnus
have
par
never
notre
been
nation
recognized
d'origine
by our
résidant
nations of
au
origins
Québec
that
ou
reside
ailleurs
in
en
Quebec
Amérique
or
du Nord.
elsewhere in North America.
Notre population a développé au cours
Our
des siècles ses
population
propres
has
communautés
elaborated
physiques
in the
avec une structure
centuries
communautaire
its
sociale,
own
politique et
physical communities
culturelle
with its
qui
own
nous est
community
propre et que nous
structures and
désirons
social
préserver
structures
tout comme
that
les
are
autres
all
nations
our own and
autochtones.
that we wish to
L'île du
preserve just like the
Grand-Calumet,
other native
Port-Coulonge,
nations.
Saint-Épiphane,
The island of
Otter
Grand
Lake,
Calumet, Fort
Couillon,
Coulonge, Saint-Épiphane,
Mont-Laurier,
Otter Lake, Couillon,
Chicoutimi, Trois-Rivières,
Chicoutimi,
les Escoumins en sont
Trois-Rivières,
des exemples.
and les Escoumins are just
Nous, les
examples.
Métis dans la province de Québec,
We, the Métis in the
déclarons que
province of
notre
Quebec,
nation ne
declare
peut
that
se
our nation
développer que
cannot
si elle se
develop
dote d'une
itself
structure
if it doesn't have
gouvernementale
a
qui
government
est propre à
structure
notre identité
that
nationale
reflects
métisse
its
pour
own
négocier
national
de nation
identity
à
in
nation.
order to negotiate from
Nous, les
nation to
Métis dans la
nation.
province de
We,
Québec,
the Métis in
avons
the
pris la
province of Quebec,
décision de se
have made
doter
the
d'une
decision
structure
to arm
gouvernementale
ourselves with a
égale et
government structure
comparable
that is
à
equal
celle
and
des autres
comparable
nations autochtones
to
au
those
Québec,
of other
au
native nations
Canada,
in Quebec,
avec la
in Canada,
formulation de nos propres
with
projets de loi
the
et
formulation of our
l'établissement de
own
nos propres
bills and the
institutions pour
establishment
nous
of our
protéger.
own personal
Nous, les Métis
institutions
dans la
in order to
province de
protect
Québec,
us. We, the Métis
voulons
in
un
the province of
gouvernement
Quebec,
national
want a
qui
national
s'occupe et
government
travaille pour la
that
protection
will work
et le
on the
mieux-être
protection
de la population
and
métisse
the
dans
better
le
being
domaine de
of
la
the
santé,
Métis
de la
population
culture,
in the
des
areas of health,
communications,
culture,
de la
communication,
fiscalité, les activités traditionnelles et contemporaines, de l'habitation, des jeunes et des personnes âgées, l'emploi, nos voisins et territoriaux, le développement socio-culturel et économique et bien d'autres encore.
And social cultural development and economic cultural, to name but a few.
Nous, les Métis dans la province de Québec,
We, the Métis in
voulons
the province
établir
of
notre
Quebec,
propre
want to
gouvernement
establish our
et de
own
mettre en place
government
une
and
structure
implement a
gouvernementale
government
concrète
structure that is
pour la
concrete
réalisation
in
d'un
order to
objectif
achieve
primordial,
our
soit d'acquérir des
objective,
mécanismes d'action
which is
directs
to
dans
have
le
a
domaine
direct
politique
mechanism
digne d'une
in the
nation
areas
distincte.
of politics,
Nous, les Métis dans la province de Québec,
which would reflect
ce que nous
our
voulons,
distinction as a
c'est
nation.
vivre dans
We
le
in the
monde
Métis of
et la
Quebec
société
would like to
d'aujourd'hui en tant
live
que
in
peuple
this
autochtone
world and
distinct.
today's society as a
Jamais
native,
nous ne
distinct
renierons
native
notre
group.
objectif
Never will
principal
we deny
et nous
or
exigeons une
ignore
fois pour
our principal
toutes
goal, and
le
we
respect de toutes les nations
demand once
autochtones
and
au
for all the
Québec ou
respect of
ailleurs,
all other nations
comme
in
nous
Quebec
avons
or
toujours
elsewhere,
respecté leur
as we've always
identité
respected
et
their
leur
own
objectif
identity and
d'autonomie
their own
gouvernementale.
goals in terms of self-government.
Si la Constitution canadienne
If
nous
the
reconnaît
Canadian
pour ce que
Constitution
nous sommes,
would recognize us for what we are, then we should, without further delay, put up to date our broad project of a distinct society in the province of Quebec to establish our government and its national autonomy. Therefore, if we are recognized as Métis in the Canadian Constitution as being equal to other Native nations, the Métis nation in Quebec should receive the same rights.
We, the
Métis in the province of Quebec,
no
longer believe that we are less a native than those who are recognized as Indians according to the Indian Act. We are the Métis in the province of Quebec.
Nous, les Métis dans la province de Québec,
and
allons bientôt mandater
will
nos
soon
leaders
be mandating
à
our
entamer
leaders
immédiatement des
and
négociations
asking them
d'autonomie
to start
gouvernementale
negotiations in
basées
terms
sur
of
la création de
self-determination
notre propre
based on the
gouvernement
creation of our own
diriger la nation
government in
métisse au
order to
Québec.
govern the Métis nation in Quebec.
Nous, les Métis dans la province de Québec,
We, the Métis
nous nous
in the
rangeons
province of Quebec,
d'égal à égal la tête
are on
haute
an equal
des nations
and keep our
autochtones
head
reconnues au
up high
Québec,
and want to be
Canada ou ailleurs
recognized
en
as a
Amérique
native
du
nation
Nord.
in Quebec, in Canada, or anywhere else
Nous, les
in North
Métis dans la
America.
province de
We,
Québec,
the Métis in the
ne
province
pouvons
of
plus
Quebec,
compromettre
can
l'avenir
no
de nos
longer
aspirations
compromise the
politiques, sociales
future
et
of our
culturelles.
political aspirations or social,
Nous, les Métis dans la
cultural
province de Québec,
aspirations. We, the Métis
voulons
in the
nous
province of
tailler une
Quebec,
place de
would
base
like
avec des
to
outils de
have a
base,
place
une structure
in this
gouvernementale de
world
base,
with our own
avec un
tools, a
vouloir,
government
une
structure,
détermination de ne plus reculer devant notre propre agenda.
we seek certain
Nous, les
important points
Métis dans
and
la
the
province de
determination
Québec,
to no longer go backwards in
optons
the
pour
front
l'identification à notre
what
nation
Canada proposes
distincte
to us. We,
et notre
the Métis,
propre
in the
structure
province of
gouvernementale
Quebec, would like to
communautaire,
have our own
nationale, confédérale,
identification
métisse.
and our own government
Merci.
at the community level,
Nous
national
aimerions
level, and
aussi
the federal
peut-être
level.
toucher
We
le
also would
côté
like to
de
broach
ce
another
que nous avons
aspect.
amené et que vous avez devant vous, qui est
There's
le
another
traité de 1701.
document
Nous
that
aimerions
you
aussi
have in
vous
front of you,
exprimer,
the
vous
Treaty of
exposer en
1701.
quelques lignes.
We would like to tell you
Situons dans
about
cette grande
where
fraternité.
we find ourselves.
Les Métis ne font pas partie que d'une entité politique et
Métis are
sociale.
not just part of a
Ils font aussi
political
partie
entity or
d'une
social
entité
entity, they're also
spirituelle.
part of a spiritual entity.
Les Métis sont au centre
The
de la roue
Métis
médicinale
are the
des quatre
center
principaux
of the
peuples de
medicinal
la
rule
Terre.
of the four principal
La roue médicinale est
peoples of the
symbolisée
earth.
par
The
les quatre
medicinal rule
couleurs
is
de ces
symbolized by
peuples,
the four colors
par le
of
rouge,
its
le
peoples,
jaune,
the red,
le blanc,
the yellow, the
le
white,
noir.
and the black.
Et chacune des
And each
couleurs
of these
correspond
colors
à l'une des quatre directions.
corresponds to one of the four
Les
directions.
Métis sont le lien
The Métis
spirituel
are the spiritual
entre la
link
spiritualité de
between
tous les peuples
spirituality of
avec
all the
celle du
peoples
peuple autochtone
with those
de la
of
roue
the native
médicinale.
people in the
Ce
medicinal
lien
field.
nous a permis d'établir
This
notre
link
propre
has allowed us to
spiritualité
establish our
de
own
réconciliateur
spirituality as
et d'unificateur
conciliators and
entre les nations qui nous ont
unifiers
conçus.
between the nations that have
Nous avons
conceived
toujours
us.
su jouer ce rôle
We have
qui
always
nous
been
a
able
été
to play
confié
this
par le
role
Créateur.
that was by the
Et la
Creator.
preuve en est là devant vous.
And the proof
Nous avons
is
su
here in
sauvegarder
front of you today.
précieusement
We have been able
ces
to
objets.
protect ourselves and
Tout
protect
comme les
these
autres peuples
elements.
de la Terre,
As the other
le
peoples
Créateur
of the
nous a
earth,
donné une
the Creator
responsabilité
gave us a
spirituelle.
responsibility, a spiritual
Il nous a donné la
responsibility.
responsabilité de
Gave us
maintenir sous
the
notre garde
responsibility of maintaining
certains objets sacrés,
in our safeguards certain
tels la
sacred
sceptre
objects,
royale, de l'équilibre
such as
et
the
de la
royal scepter
justice
of equilibrium
entre les
and
peuples de
justice
l'île de la Tortue.
between the peoples
À
of the
Montréal,
island of
les
the Turtle.
Métis ont
In
participé comme
Montreal,
des
the Métis have
interprètes,
participated
non
as
seulement
the
linguistiques,
interpreters, not
mais
only
aussi
linguistic
spirituels,
interpreters, but the
à
spiritual
l'élaboration
interpreters
d'un traité
in the
confédéral de
elaboration
paix
of
et
a
d'amitié
federal treaty
du
of
génie
peace
politique
and
de
friendship
l'honorable Kondiaron.
in the political
La
genius
signature
of
de
the
ce
honorable
traité s'est
Kondiaronk.
déroulée ici
This
même, à
signature
Montréal,
of this treaty
le 4
happened
août
right here in Montreal, the 4th
1701.
of August,
Ayant comme
1701.
objectif d'unir dans la paix et
The
l'amitié
goal
toutes les populations des nations en Amérique du Nord, venant des extrémités de ce vaste continent. Et comme métis, nous devons par obligation et selon nos responsabilités spirituelles de vous le rappeler, car nous sommes des traités vivants. Pour maintenir l'esprit de ce traité qui a été l'outil principal d'une activité de guérison pour arrêter la guerre, vous devez tous encore aujourd'hui, jetez vos yeux sur l'arbre de paix qui a été planté sur la plus haute montagne ici à Montréal en 1701, car toutes les nations ont planté cet arbre avec de profondes racines pour que ni les vents, ni les orages, ni aucun autre accident de parcours ne puisse le renverser dans le respect de tous et chacun. L'esprit et la spiritualité de cette grande paix, surtout de celle de Condiaron, est toujours avec nous aujourd'hui pour nous rappeler une vision de l'avenir vieille de 280 qui nous démontre toujours la vraie relation et nos responsabilités envers nous tous dans le respect de l'autodétermination et de l'autosuffisance de tous et chacun, et surtout de la guérison de nos relations politiques, sociales, culturelles et spirituelles. Nous avons appris des anciens et nous aimerions aussi vous souligner que vos anciens, de n'importe laquelle nation sur l'île de la Tortue, sont aussi vos anciens, car nous sommes le résultat spirituel du passé, du présent et du futur de vos deux rencontres. Nous sommes de l'arc-en-ciel et nous n'avons aucune couleur particulière qui nous est propre. Nous avons vos cheveux blancs, tout comme nous avons vos cheveux noirs. Nous avons vos yeux bleus, comme nous avons vos yeux bruns. Votre esprit nous pénètre comme elle vous pénètre. Tout comme vous, nous sommes les enfants du cœur et nous demandons un respect spirituel autant que d'un respect politique, social et culturel. Nous sommes aussi de l'esprit de la prophétie de ce nouveau peuple, et nous sommes comme vous, fiers d'être des êtres humains. Nous sommes ceux que personne n'a voulu au cours des siècles, parce que personne n'essaie de nous comprendre. Peut-être c'est parce que nous reflétons trop ce que les autres sont et seront éventuellement. Nous sommes peut-être le vrai miroir de votre histoire. Nous parlons tous vos langues.
We all speak your
et nous vivons
languages,
tous vos spiritualités.
and we know
C'est
about your
pourquoi nous avons un
spirituality.
esprit
And this
si
is why
réconciliateur.
our spirit is such a
Tout comme
conciliating
vos
one.
nations auxquelles vous vous
As the
identifiez,
nations to which you
la nation
identify
métisse au
yourself,
Québec ou
the
ailleurs
Métis Nation
a
in
joué
Quebec
son
or elsewhere
rôle
has played its role
et le joue toujours au sein de la roue
and will
médicinale.
always play it
Car
in
nous sommes
this
peut-être le
medicinal
trait d'union
wheel,
de
because
votre
we
problème,
are perhaps
de
the
votre
hyphen
désaccord.
your problem,
Si
the
seulement
hyphen
tous et
in
chacun
your
prenaient le temps de nous
contention.
connaître
If only
et
you
de
took
nous
the time
écouter,
to know us all
car
and
vous
to
avez
listen
tous
to
une
us,
responsabilité
because you all have
spirituelle
a
envers nous.
spiritual responsibility towards us.
Nous sommes métis de la nation métisse du Canada
We
et de
are
l'Amérique
Métis
du
from the
Nord et
National
de celle
Métis
de l'île
Council
de
of
la
Canada
Tortue.
and from the
Et
north
notre
and from the
vision est
island
belle
of
et
the
plus
Turtle.
belle
And our
que vous
vision is
pouvez
beautiful and
l'imaginer.
more beautiful than you
Et
can
tout comme
even
vous, nous
start to
faisons
imagine.
partie de
And just
l'esprit
as you, we
du
are part
traité
of
de
the spirit of the
1701
Treaty of
et celle de la
1701
grande
and
confédération
that
des
of
peuples
the
autochtones
great
qui
confederation
sera
of
bientôt
the
rétablie sur
native
l'île de la
people that will
Tortue.
soon be
Nous sommes
reestablished on
l'esprit de
the
la
Turtle
prophétie des
Island.
sept feux.
We are the spirit of the
Toutes nos
prophecy of the
populations
seven
désirent que
fires.
vivent dans la
All
paix
these
et
populations want to live
l'amitié
in peace and in
selon
friendship
le respect
according
des valeurs et des coutumes
to
de ce
respect
que nous
and the
sommes comme
values and the
citoyens métis, mes
customs
frères,
that we represent, because
comme
we are
citoyens des
Métis,
Premières
my
Nations,
brothers,
mes frères,
as citizens, as the
comme
First
citoyens
Nation, my
Inuits, mes
brothers,
frères,
as the
comme
Inuit
citoyens
citizens,
québécois,
my
mes
brothers,
frères,
as Quebec
comme
citizens,
citoyens
my
canadiens, mes
my
frères.
brothers, as Canadian
L'occasion,
citizens, my brothers,
comme l'a dit un jour
and
Condiaron, est
as
encore belle.
Condiaron
C'est
before,
pourquoi nous
the
devons nous
opportunity
tous
is
nous
still a good
unir.
one, and this is why we must
Encore
all
une
unite
fois,
once again
pour réitérer
to reiterate
l'esprit du feu,
the
de la
spirit
grande
of the
paix
fire towards
de
great
1701,
peace, the
allumée
great peace
ici à
of
Montréal,
1701 that
dans le
was
respect de nos
lit
valeurs
here in Montreal,
spirituelles,
in the respect
de
of
vos
our
valeurs
spiritual values and of your
de
spiritual
toutes les valeurs
values,
spirituelles
of
et
all
culturelles
spiritual
de
values,
tous et chacun.
cultural and others, of each
Et
and
j'en
every one of us.
profite en même
And
temps
I'll
pour
take advantage of this moment to
remettre à la Commission. Et je demanderai à M. Meyer, Bruno
present
Meyer, de
something to the
remettre à
Commission,
la
and I'll
Commission
ask Mr. Mayer
un jeune
to
arbre
give a young
paix
tree to the
et
Commission, a
d'amitié.
tree of peace and friendship.
Bruno.
Bruno?
Chacune d'entre vous
Thank each and every one of you
de vous être déplacés pour venir faire
for
cette
having come here
présentation,
today and
de l'avoir bien sûr
give your presentation.
préparée.
And thank you for having prepared it, obviously.
Nous savons que est importante.
We know that this whole issue is a very important one to you. It is dear to your
Le
hearts.
temps passe rapidement, je
And
voudrais
since the time is flying by quite quickly,
procéder à quelques questions.
I will now
La première
go on with a few questions.
étant la suivante. Nous avons eu cette semaine une
This week,
présentation de l'Association des Métis
there was a presentation of the
et des
Métis
Indiens hors réserve du
Association
Québec.
and Indians outside the reserves
Je
in
comprends,
Quebec.
vous nous avez exprimé le fait que
And I understand you
vous ne représentez pas,
said that
pas
you didn't
regroupé en association comme telle,
represent,
mais j'aimerais avoir un
you
peu,
didn't put yourself in groups and certain
votre point de vue
associations as
sur,
such, but I'd like to know what your point of view is
le lien, par exemple, entre
concerning
cette
the
association
link
qui
between that
nous a fait
association
une présentation plus tôt cette semaine
that made a presentation earlier
et
this week
ce que vous appelez la
and what
Nation métisse du
you
Québec.
call the Métis Nation of Quebec.
Nous tous ici, nous faisons partie d'un peuple.
We are all part of a people
Au Québec,
that is
la nation métisse
the
au Canada.
Métis Nation in Quebec, the Métis
Certains
Nation
d'entre nous
in Canada.
sont représentés par des associations.
Some of us are represented by certain
Mais
associations,
il ne peut y avoir qu'un seul gouvernement.
but there is only one government. There can only be one
Nous
government.
savons, comme tous ici nous savons, la
We
nation
know,
métisse
as we all know,
au Canada et
that
au
the
Québec
Métis Nation
est à
in
sa-
Canada
ses
and in
pre-
Quebec
ses premiers balbutiements.
is at its first
Nous
steps.
devons, comme un enfant, comme
As
un
a
bébé,
child, as
apprendre à
a
marcher.
baby, we have to learn how to walk.
Mais nous sommes déterminés à faire
And we
notre
are
deuxième pas.
determined
Nous considérons
to
aujourd'hui
go even further
que nous avons
because
fait le
we
premier.
consider that today was the first step.
Les associations autochtones,
The native
il en existe.
associations,
Je crois qu'il en
there
il
are
vont
several of them,
exister encore
and I think
longtemps.
they will exist for a long
Ces
time
associations
because those
ont un but
associations have a goal
et une mission
and a mission,
d'offrir des services
and they have to offer
et d'agir comme
services
porte-parole.
and to act as spokespeople.
Cependant, les Métis
Yet these Métis
ne veulent plus être sur le banc en arrière comme nous l'avons
no
dit
longer
dans
want to be on the back bench, as we've said it so clearly in our
le même banc
presentation. We want to be
tous les autres
on that
nations
same
au Québec
bench
et au
as the
Canada.
other nations in Quebec and in Canada.
C'est pourquoi nous avons décidé
And this is
de
why
venir
we
vous
have
présenter
decided
ces documents,
to present these
Et
documents to you here today.
notre vision de l'avenir.
And we wanted to tell you about our vision of the future.
Alors, seulement pour être sûr que je
So
sais
just to
bien
be sure that I've understood things correctly,
de quoi il s'agit, vous êtes
if I
ici à
understand
titre
what's going on, you are
individuel
here as
et
individuals,
avec la préoccupation
but
de mettre de l'avant
your concern is
Nation métisse.
go forward with your principle of Métis Nation. Okay.
Ce qui n'empêche pas certains d'entre vous
Which doesn't prevent a certain number of you from being part of one association or another. All right, my second question then,
l'Association des Métis et Indiens en réserve du
and I
Québec,
asked this question to the Association of the Métis Nations outside the reserves in Quebec, and I alluded to certain documents.
l'accord politique qui a été conclu
I mentioned the political
en parallèle
agreement
avec,
that was made
l'entente de Charlottetown
in
concernant
tandem
la
with the
Nation
Charlottetown
métisse de
Accord
l'Ouest.
concerning the Métis Nation of the West.
Évidemment, vous savez, vous connaissez très bien la situation qui veut que
You're aware
les Métis,
of the situation
dont l'origine est de la rivière
for
Rouge,
the Métis people whose origins are from the Red River and that have been divided into different prairie provinces and territories and a little bit at the west of Ontario.
estiment former une nation distincte
And they believe they make up for a distinct nation on the cultural and political level.
sur le plan du
cultural
travail,
level.
la Commission
Excuse me.
nous demande de
And
travailler distinctement
the
avec
Commission, as a Commission, we have to work distinctly with them, as opposed to the Métis Nation as a whole and the rest of Canada,
Québec et
and in
l'Est
particular those
du
of
Canada,
Quebec and the
évidemment,
eastern part of Quebec or Labrador,
d'où vient Mary Celeste en particulier.
where Mrs. Mary Celette comes from,
Ouais, alors,
who's on my right here.
c'est une réalité politique à ce moment-ci
So,
avec laquelle on doit,
This happens to be a political
on doit
reality
travailler. Alors, j'aimerais, au
with
fond,
which we
vous,
have to cope.
vous poser la question. Vous
So
parlez de la
I would like to
nation
ask you a
métisse au
question.
Québec.
You speak of the Métis Nation in Quebec.
est-ce que vous englobez, si je comprends bien, c'est pour le Québec?
If I understand things correctly, this is for Quebec. You do not include the Métis that are in New Brunswick or in Nova Scotia or in Labrador.
J'aimerais avoir une explicitation là-dessus.
Could you give me a little bit more detail on that issue? Tell me what your thoughts are on that.
Je crois que la nation métisse au Québec,
I think that the Métis Nation in Quebec
dans le fait qu'il existe un peuple
is legitimate because there's
nous considérons que
Métis people in Quebec.
Il y a
We consider
un peuple métis
that
partout
there
au Canada
is
et en Amérique du Nord.
Métis people everywhere in Canada and even in Northern
Ces
America.
gens, les nations sont formées
These
en fonction
nations are shaped in terms
d'un sentiment d'appartenance.
Of a feeling of belonging.
Au Québec, comme on a eu des discussions avec
in Quebec, there
les
have been
Métis du
discussions
Labrador,
with the Métis of Labrador, of New Brunswick,
Même cette semaine,
and even this week in Ottawa, we held discussions with the Métis from British Columbia.
Et aussi surprenant que cela puisse paraître,
and as surprising as it may seem,
exactement les mêmes
we have exactly
les mêmes
the same aspirations, discussions, and visions of the future for the Métis people of the Turtle Island.
J'en ai été très surpris.
I was quite flabbergasted. I didn't think that we could be really on the same wavelength.
Même sur les détails.
Even on the very details, the nitty-gritty of the vision of our future.
Les gens partout au Canada et en
So I think people everywhere in Canada and Northern America, according to their aspirations and according to their similar points in their aspirations, have the opportunity to act as representatives or as spokespeople of a nation anywhere else in Canada. But in Quebec,
je pense qu'il ne peut y avoir
I don't think
plusieurs nations.
There can be several nations.
Il doit y avoir seulement un gouvernement.
There must be only one government for the Métis Nation of Quebec. We don't pretend to be the government of that nation. The Métis Nation in Quebec exists because the Métis people exist, and we are representatives of that people.
Je voudrais rajouter quelque chose.
I would like to add something, please.
La nation métisse dans
the
l'Ouest,
Métis Nation
Manitoba.
in the West,
On
in
sait
Manitoba.
de qui il vient.
We know where these people are coming from. A member of my family, Louis Riel,
À la base.
who was at the very
Mais Louis Riel est
foundation of all this. But
de
Louis Riel is from Lavaltrie, and he was a Métis in Lavaltrie before being a Métis in the West.
Je pense qu'il faut se mettre ça dans la tête.
And I think that that has to be clearly said.
Que des métis dans l'Est, il y en existait déjà.
In the eastern part were there
C'est tout ce que je peux dire.
Since a long time. That's all I'd like to say.
Merci. Sur le plan...
Thank you.
Oui, est-ce que ça va?
S'il vous plaît.
Please, I'd like to take the floor.
Je pense que il ne faudrait pas avoir peur de la présente situation.
I think that one shouldn't fear the present situation.
Honorable commissaire.
And you, Honorable Commissioner,
on compte sur votre appui peut-être pour
we're really counting on your support. We hope that you'll understand us.
Immoral,
you have to understand how ill and reprehensible it would be on the political level to exclude a group because of its ethnicity.
Je pense que vous peut-être avez vécu la même situation.
Perhaps you've lived the same situation that you might have had lived within your Canadian Confederation.
On vit présentement le même problème.
We're living the same type of experience presently. And this is why it is important that this political problem that exists even within the Commission
ne cause pas préjudice
doesn't account for some prejudice against our ways and means of expression, our right to participate, because we do have a contribution to make here at the Commission. I'd like to say something clearly here right away before you go any further. I wasn't speaking of, there is no political problem within the Commission itself. What I was saying is that meeting people as we do today, meeting up with you, in people in the national
par exemple, on va organiser une table ronde nationale
regroup of métis
sur la question métisse.
On this whole issue of métis,
la difficulté,
we are struck by the difficulty or by the reality, if you will, that the Western Métis are telling us we are concerned with something that is common to us and that is ours and is different from other Canadian Métis, and we want you to look at our concerns as such distinctly. So I was simply establishing the fact that that reality was existent, and it's the same thing. If I told you I'm going to be in Labrador next week, next week we would have to take into account the fact that you tell us that the Métis in Quebec want to look at the situation solely.
Les différences et la diversité qui existent,
the differences, the discrepancies, the variables that exist add to the complexity of the work of the Commission, and it's in that sense that I was making the observation. What is clear,
c'est la question là que je vous pose, la difficulté.
And this has to do with the question that I'm going to be asking you. You speak of the difficulty of a government in the province of Quebec for the Métis nation, and you stated the fact that indeed you do represent one person in Pointe-Calumet, Chicoutimi, the different regions in Quebec, different areas. So the question now that is asked to us is this question of self-determination. It's sort of when there isn't some sort of a territorial land that we can attach to all of this, and this is something I'm wondering about. This is something you don't speak of in your brief, and it's the first issue that strikes me. It's true for other groups also, and it's true in urban environments, generally speaking, when we speak of self-determination in urban centers, urban settings, for all native people, Inuits, Indians, or what have you.
Premièrement, la première que vous avez soulevée.
The first point you've
J'aimerais aussi vous clarifier la question des présentations.
I'll speak of later. I'll then speak to you about the different associations. You have to know that associations can push very strongly, but there's only one Métis nation. Let's look at the very bottom, the different associations as such. You have to understand that it's been 20 years that we're sort of fuddling in the water, and we're at the mercy of the funds that are put at the disposition of one group or another, depending on the fact whether it's for the goals of Indians or for the Métis. But we, the Métis, we're always in the doorframe. We're always looking at the others, seeing them becoming Indians, because these Indians have lost their Indian status for one reason or another. But we now want to establish a process of social and cultural development. Do you want to know what our territorial definition is? It's quite simple. Our first definition, as you know, is that as a Métis, we are part of the agreements in the treaty, but we never spoke of this in Quebec because we were to all the problems that the Indians outside the reserves were dealing with. We said in the text very clearly that we don't live on reserves, we have very specific reserves. Go to Île Calumet. I invite you to go to the Île du Calumet, and my colleague here will give you a guided tour of the island, and he'll show you what Métis living is like.
regarde aussi
On top of
l'aspect
that,
territorial
we
basé
look at
sur
the
un
territorial
territoire
aspect
que j'ai
based on
personnellement
a
acheté.
territory that I personally bought.
Ma propriété privée et mon territoire
My
à moi.
private property, my very own
Et
territory.
l'ensemble de mon territoire est la
And the whole of my
composante des 35
territory
000 métis qui détiennent
is made up of the
les territoires qu'ils ont
35,000
achetés de leur poche.
Métis that
C'est
have bought their
négociable.
own land with their own money from their own pockets. That's territory.
Et par après, à l'intérieur des ententes de traité, il
Afterwards,
faut que les
with
autres
the treaty
nations
agreements,
comprennent
other nations have to
que
understand.
nous sommes issus de traités. Les Abénakis, les Sites, les Micmacs, et les Algonquins qui ont fait partie de ce traité-là ou du traité de 1750. J'aimerais pas rentrer dans une longue réponse historique, mais les faits sont là. Je pense que les chercheurs de la Commission qui sont à votre disposition peuvent les faire soutirer. D'ailleurs, il y a eu des jugements dernièrement
judgments issued in New Brunswick lately, which indicated clearly that a treaty may prevail in the case of the Indian Act. If my grandfather, Ambrose Saint-Aubin, who followed the 1750 treaty, were here, he'd say clearly, Claude,
si au cours des années, est obligé de prendre une identité qui
you have to take an identity which is not linked to the Malecite nation. Claude
détenteur de traités, de droits de
has a
traité.
treaty and the treaty
Donc
rights.
mettez tout ensemble
So
et
put
aussi
it all
prenez en
together
considération
and
et
take into
sans
consideration
restreindre
in
les
this
droits
without
de mes
limiting the
frères
rights
des
of
Premières
my
Nations,
brothers from the First
des
Nations.
traités de base. Vous devez
On basic
comprendre
treaties,
que
you
nous,
must understand
personne
that
ne
we,
peut nous
as far as we're concerned,
nous accuser
nobody can accuse us
que nous ne payons pas
that
d'impôts.
we do not
Nous
pay
ne
taxes.
quémandons pas.
We do not beg.
Personne ne quémande.
Nobody
Les Premières
begs.
Nations ne quémandent
The
pas.
First
On
Nations
parle
do not beg.
de
We're
ristourne de
talking
droits.
about a return of
Ben, nous,
rights.
pour nos propriétés privées et
For
et
us,
du fait que nous payons des
private
impôts,
property and
nous
the fact that
pourrions
we
négocier
pay
des
taxes
ristournes
should allow us
d'imposition
to
pour
negotiate
gérer
tax
nos gouvernements,
return on
pour gérer
taxes to manage
le fait de la
our
promotion
government
culturelle, sociale et
and the
politique
fact
dans nos
that we are
communautés.
promoting
On ne
social
demande pas le
and
100%, on
cultural
pourrait négocier.
policies in our
On ne vous a pas tablé
communities. We don't
aucunement
ask for
les grandes
100%.
données
We
d'un
didn't
gouvernement.
give you
On a
or
tout
ask
simplement
for the
tablé
overall
nos
data of a
perspectives d'avenir et
large
les
government. We
possibilités
wanted to
qui peuvent
indicate
résoudre
what the possibilities
dans des
are
négociations.
for our
La question des
in terms
associations,
of
j'aimerais
negotiations
clarifier
and
que
for the association.
notre
I'd like to
confrère,
clarify
M.
that
Paradis, probablement qui
our
vous a
confrère, M.
lui
Paradis,
aussi
who
réfléchi là-dessus, mais lui aussi
caused you
est
to
pris
reflect on this,
sous
is also caught
d'associations. Lui aussi est sûrement prêt
within his
dans sa
associations,
présentation, j'en suis
and
sûr,
I'm sure in his
de
presentation
regarder
should be able to
l'entité
look
métisse comme une
into the
entité nationale.
Métis
J'en suis
entity as a
convaincu.
national entity.
Alors, je vous remercie. Comme le
thank
temps
you.
passe,
As
je
time
dois dire
goes
que
by,
vous avez certainement apporté
You certainly, I must say,
un point de vue
brought
nouveau, différent
to this commission a different point of
pour
view
approcher la question métisse au
to
Québec.
deal with
Comme vous le
the
dites,
Métis matter
c'est l'une des
in
premières fois
Quebec.
là, que vous le faites
It's one of the
de
first
cette
time
façon-là.
that you
Vous
present
avez remis
things in this manner.
bon nombre de documents.
You give us
en
a
outre
number
de
of
ceux que-
documents
dont vous
besides
avez
the
fait
one
la
you
lecture.
read,
Alors, nous allons en prendre
and
connaissance
we'll
et
look at them.
nous allons revenir à Montréal. à
And we'll
l'automne.
come back in Montreal in the fall,
si,
to Montreal in the fall.
D'ici ce temps-là, il y a des échanges
And if
additionnels,
between
des
now and then there
clarifications,
should
des
be clarifications
côté
needed
de
and
notre service de
as well as
recherche,
contact
ou d'autres
with our
composantes de la
research
commission,
services as
ça
well
pourra
as
prendre place.
with other
Alors, pour
components of
l'instant,
the
je pense
commission,
que,
this should be possible.
L'objectif
But
de
presently, the
sensibilisation
objective
que
of
vous poursuivez
sensitization which you
est
are
certainement acquis.
pursuing is certainly
Et, je vous remercie
with the Commission,
de l'avoir fait.
and I
Vous
thank
aurez
you for
peut-être,
doing so.
demander
Perhaps I'd like to
ma
ask
collègue,
my colleague,
Mary Sillett,
Mary Sillett,
de vous adresser la parole.
to talk to you. Mary?
Well, I too would like to join my colleague in thanking you very, very much. I know that there's been a lot of work put into the development of these presentations. And I was very, very touched by the opening and also by the gift. And please rest assured that your concerns won't go unheard. Thank you very much. Nakumik.
Merci. Proceed whenever you're ready.
Thank you. We would like
Thank you for this opportunity of sharing our presentation with you and sharing our concerns. My name is Bern Purdon. I'm chairman of the monitoring committee of the on Native Concerns of the Montreal-Ottawa Conference of the United Church of Canada, and I have two members of our committee, Faye Wakeling and Pierre Goldberger, with me. I would like to preface our presentation by saying that in our work we have always attempted to be open to the leading of the Spirit, and we would ask if we might just have a moment of silence to acknowledge the Spirit of the Creator whose children we all are. Of one blood, all the peoples of earth. In earth's womb, waters flow, bringing all life to birth. Rivers and lakes, in your veins and mine, 'tis the same sacred spring, whether water, blood, wine. We're mysteriously one. Let us never forget, let us live reverently and each other respect, for the presence of God can be found everywhere. Let us honor that presence as earth's fruits we share. Our presentation is prefaced with a word from the prophet Amos, "Let justice flow like a mighty river." And we speak as members of the Monitoring Committee on Native Concerns, which came into existence during the crisis, the Oka crisis of 1990, when we were came into being to be in solidarity with and support of the Native peoples in Ganawage and Ganasatake, to keep our church informed, engage our members in and participate in the formulation of our church's policies on Native concerns. And many of our church congregations and members were directly involved throughout the Oka crisis, and our presence in both Ganasatake and Ganawage has continued through a pastoral presence, participation in the ongoing Human Rights Watch at Ganawage, and in supporting healing and reconciliation in both communities. The Monitoring Committee has also participated in organizing and being part of delegations to Great Whale River and ongoing analysis of the Native concerns in this region. Our presentation is in three parts. In the first part, we look at the past and acknowledge our own responsibility and pledging to walk in a new way. In the second part, it is our witness of what we have experienced, what we experienced in the summer of 1990 and have experienced since that time. And then in the third part, our recommendations for walking on the path of justice.
Le premier point est une approche en ce qui concerne le renouvellement d'une attitude afin de favoriser des relations justes avec les peuples autochtones et métis. Sans ces nouvelles relations, nous ne croyons pas qu'il puisse y avoir des résolutions purement techniques, purement politiques, car sans cette approche du cœur et de l'esprit, il n'y aura qu'une approche froide.
The approach would be cold, and such relationships have already proved fatal to the First Nations. Facing the past, we must recognize our responsibility, and we must decide to move along a new path. We are aware here this afternoon that should there be windows that we could see the rivers, the walking pathway, to rebaptize the St. Lawrence by the colonists who were only able to survive here thanks to the hospitality of the natives living in the region. Yet since then, the relationship between the colonists and the natives, native populations grew worse. This is the painful history of broken treaties and of false promises and of repeated treasons. After a great many centuries of such unfair treatment, the Métis and Native nations find themselves dispossessed of their territories, of their economic basis, in fact despised because of their spiritual heritage, deprived of all their rights and customs, can deny their sovereignty as a native nations equal as First Nations. In fact, the natives live amongst us as colonized people here in Canada, locked in the chains by the Indian Act, pushed by violence to the brink of extinction, whether this violence is hidden or open, by political bureaucracy, by the police, by the army, and by their control. They grow in the despair of a poverty which was imposed on them. More often than others, they are the scapegoats, suffering from the contempt of our society with a future which seems to be blocked for their nation and for their children and children's children. Even though many people in this country, and we are amongst them, had an enriching experience of meeting the natives based on their hospitality, their respect and mutual enrichment, and as a society expressed in its state relationship or relationship with the First Nations were always vitiated, dominant, often repressive, sometimes tolerating, but rarely, if ever, equal and respect. In respect, as expressed in the Duro Wampum and as our own Christian faith calls upon, inspired the respect and dignity owed every one of God's child.
We have to acknowledge our responsibility for the past and seek new ways for the present that will reopen the future. Specifically, as a church, we have recognized our historical responsibility in the subjection of Aboriginal peoples of Canada, as well as the denial of their spiritual richness. We acknowledge that we have been part of much that has caused the pain and terror of Native peoples. In 1986, the United Church of Canada, after much prayer and reflection, presented a formal apology to the Native peoples of Canada. And that apology has been for us the starting point of seeking a new relationship and new ways of walking alongside Native peoples. To cite a few sentences from that apology, it reads, "Long before my people journeyed to this land, your people were here. And you received from your elders an understanding of creation and of the mystery that surrounds us all that was deep and rich and to be treasured. We did not hear you when you shared your vision. We imposed our civilization as a condition of accepting the gospel. And in so doing, we helped to destroy the vision that made you what you were. As a result, you and we are and the image of the Creator in us twisted, blurred, and we are not what God meant us to be." After much thought and prayer, in 1988, the All-Native Circle of the United Church responded. And part of their apology was expressed in this way. The apology made to the Native people of Canada by the United Church of Canada in August 1986 has been a very important step forward. The All-Native Circle Conference has acknowledged your apology. And the Native people of the All-Native Circle Conference hope and pray that the apology is not symbolic, but that these are words of action and sincerity. We are trying to learn what action and sincerity might mean, and part of our witness and our continuing listening to and trying with and alongside the Native peoples in the past numbers of years have been our way of attempting to follow through.
In 1987, the major churches in Canada prepared a document called New Covenant with the Native Peoples, in which it is stated, "Following the liberating message of the gospel, we believe that this is a time for new beginnings, a time to rectify historical injustices and to recognize the rights of Aboriginal peoples in the Canadian Constitution. It is a time to establish a new covenant with the First Peoples and Nations of Canada. It is well known that numerous Aboriginal nations and cultures existed in this land prior to the European occupation some 4 centuries ago. These Aboriginal societies were self-governing nations with their own self-sufficient economies, characterized by distinct cultural practices, social structure, spiritual traditions, and strong family bonds. Today, after the experience of cultural oppression and economic dependency in recent centuries, Aboriginal peoples are struggling to decolonize themselves and regain recognition of their historic rights in Canada. These Aboriginal rights are recognized in both international law and the historic documents of this country. We maintain, however, that the rights of Aboriginal peoples are not simply a legal or political issue, but first and foremost a moral issue touching the very soul and heart of Canada. End of quotation. Church leaders called for guaranteeing Native peoples the right to be distinct peoples, the right to an adequate land base, the right to self-determination, and also said, as a country, we have a unique opportunity to overcome past injustices, bind up the wounds, and develop just relationships by establishing a new covenant with Aboriginal peoples. Country, we should not allow this historic moment to slip by without taking action along these lines. But alas, not only such new covenants has not taken effect, but its intention and its very dream has been violated in the Oka crisis and ensuing pain. We move to the second part of our presentation, which is our witness in the Oka crisis. We do this partly because the events and the things that we became aware of at that time brought out in a very powerful way the dark side of the collective Canadian psyche. And it is always the tendency for us to want to repress and forget about the dark part of ourselves. And it seems that as